what do you want to be, a filmmaker or a film worker? At a certain point, I didn't work on people's films. I made films. I was enraptured by the fact that movie making was both creative, artistic, in one's imagination, but also very precise. Even if you're the most talented person, you still have to prove yourself. And that journey of proving has sacrifice. Documentary film is both easier and harder for a student. Easier in terms of kind of aspiration, but harder because real life is not scripted. People don't.
Hello and welcome to the third season of the Ajyal Show, produced to you by Doha Film Institute. I'm your host, Mohammed Abdulaziz Fakhro. Documentary films can start as a question and end as a mirror. They can be deeply personal, yet somehow speak to strangers. Powerful documentaries demand a rare kind of courage, to stay with a story until it slowly unravels itself. Our guest today is a documentary filmmaker and educator. His work explores social justice themes in the United States, from race to identity. He's also been teaching filmmaking since 1994, pushing students to listen deeply, build relationships, and tell stories that really matter. In this conversation, we'll trace how he found filmmaking almost by accident, why his first feature documentary took 10 years to make, and how he approaches teaching documentary here in Qatar. Without further ado, let's welcome Professor Marco Williams.
Thank you for having me, and what a lovely introduction. I'm very honored to be here.
I want to talk about your journey from being your adolescence. You didn't grow up with a TV, and then you stumbled upon, I think it was a Hitchcock class that made you realize things. It was kind of sort of a pivotal moment.
Yes, so I grew up in New York City. I grew up in a neighborhood called the Lower East Side, a multi-ethnic, multiracial neighborhood. I was raised by a single mother. I'm an only child.
Okay.
My entertainment, therefore, was the streets of New York, my friends, no TV in the house, a radio. Radio, wow.
Yeah.
Aging myself. A radio was kind of part of my existence. And perhaps I benefited to some extent in discovering and being excited by the world because I was not rushing home to watch programs on TV.
Okay.
As an undergraduate at college, it's not that I'm proud of it, but as an undergraduate at Harvard University,
Wow. Okay.
I had to fulfill a requirement called humanities requirement.
Okay.
And my advisor said there's a course that the students refer to as Monday night at the movies, i.e., it was supposed to be an easy class. And I said, sure, Monday night at the movies, that sounds fun and easy.
Okay.
And that course was on the films of Alfred Hitchcock, whom I didn't know anything about. But after 15 weeks and probably watching almost all of his films, I was enraptured by the fact that movie making was both creative, artistic in one's imagination, but also, at least from the perspective of Alfred Hitchcock, was very precise. There were really clear intentions in what he did. And it was sort of like falling in love for the first time. It was really weird. I wanted to make movies.
Okay.
I didn't know how to make movies, but I wanted to make movies.
May I ask, what were you studying in Harvard?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I got to Harvard. I didn't even want to go to Harvard.
Okay.
But there's no adult in a child's life that will let you not go to at least the most famous or most important or significant university in the United States. So I went. I treated my first year of college as though it was my 13th year of high school. I didn't know what college was. I was the first person in my family to go to college.
Okay.
I took trigonometry. What for, I don't know.
Sounds fun.
That was horrible. I took Shakespeare. That was fine, but it was an English class. So that was like what I did as a senior. I took math. I took history. So I didn't know what I wanted, and then I stumbled upon this class.
Okay.
And in fact, though, even though I stumbled upon that class, I left Harvard after my freshman year. I took 2 years off from Harvard. I went back to the Lower East Side.
Okay.
I went back to my community. I fumbled and stumbled around. I hung out with the guys. And little by little, I realized that I had left them. We had...
Yes, kind of parted ways.
Yes, and even they were upset that I had come back to the neighborhood.
Why so?
I got into Harvard.
Yeah.
I was repping the neighborhood. And so when I returned, I then found photography and filmmaking, not just film studies, but filmmaking.
And what was it about filmmaking that pulled you in?
There are so many things about the films of Alfred Hitchcock that I learned just watching how certain compositions or the movement of the camera, the elegance of his frame, how a high-angle shot might have been used, and suddenly all of these umbrellas are opened, and now you have all these black umbrellas, black and white films, mind you. So there were a lot of things that I was curious about. I didn't really know how you did it. I didn't have a foundation of watching films. In fact, the only films that I watched in the neighborhood, we would go to kung fu films with Bruce Lee, and we just went for the action, not for the cinematic compositions. So I was very drawn to what was possible. It was not only what was possible in terms of creating images, creating meaning, but it was something for me, a kid from the Lower East Side, what was possible to do that might have an impact that wasn't law or medicine or business. It wasn't necessarily education, but it was tapping into creativity. And again, I didn't really understand all that. I'm now looking back and sort of appreciating kind of these steps.
And when did you decide, okay, I'm gonna pick up my stuff, I'm gonna learn filmmaking now?
All right, I returned to Cambridge, where Harvard is, and I worked as a short order cook. I then gradually found my way back to New York. In New York City, I worked in the warehouse. What was my job? Folding pants, putting them in boxes, putting tape on the boxes, shipping them out. While I was enjoying being with the guys, I was also frustrated. I was of the neighborhood, and I was apart from it. I had found a new door. And I then decided, because of the Hitchcock class, I decided to take a photography class at a night school. And that was the beginning of like, okay, I'm ready to go back. I didn't know about finding a filmmaking class, even though I'm in New York City. NYU is right there. I didn't know NYU. So that's what got me back to college, and a decision that I wanted to get into the filmmaking classes and into the department that housed or was home to filmmaking. Sometimes it's not a straight line. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you zig and zag, and something happens, and you realize this is where I want to be. And then I became very dogged and very determined to pursue filmmaking.
Okay, from consuming the arts to creating the arts, what was that transition like?
So here's a paradox. At Harvard, at least when I was there, the film studies courses were all fiction. We studied fiction films. The film creation courses were nonfiction, were documentary and experimental. So think of this image. I didn't know how to swim. I didn't know how to make films. They put me into this swimming pool, learned to do the backstroke. Maybe I wanted to do the crawl because that was Hitchcock, but this is what it was. And as I said, I became very dogged and determined, and I just wanted I wanted this. I was in over my head on the one hand, but nobody outworked me. Nobody was more determined than me in the first filmmaking class I took. Our class film was called Conversations with the Blind. You make a group film, and we decided to, as a class, to film and tell the stories of 4 or 5 different blind people. So we made this film, and then one night after the cut was made, I went into the building and I recut the whole film. I was certain that I had made it much, 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 much better. And my professor, Chris, had to sort of say, Marco, you've done well, but it's not exactly much better, and this is a collaborative, creative process, and you do need to listen and hear your classmates. Humbly, I was not the best at camera, at sound, but as I said, I was all in, and I was just kind of give me. And so that was the beginning of my journey. I then took another filmmaking class, made my first kind of successful film. It's called From Harlem to Harvard. It's a documentary. So that's kind of my beginnings, is just sort of accidental, as you noted. And upon discovering this world, I wanted it very badly.
Definitely not a linear path.
No.
Yeah. How many prior movies did you make up until that point?
I had done From Harlem to Harvard. I had done a thesis film that was not very good. And then I spent 10 years making In Search of Our Fathers. And in that 10 years of making it, I started as a senior at Harvard. But in the interim, I tried to get employment in the movie business.
How did you make an earning?
I think I started in 1991. I went to New York, and I was a PA, a production assistant on commercials. I was the best. I had this encounter on a commercial for M&M's candy. And back in those days, M&M's had a slogan that said, M&M's melt in your mouth, not in your hands. My job was to wipe the hands of the child actor, because M&M's do melt in your hands, especially under bright lights. And at that moment, I left that day and said, what the F am I doing? I went to Harvard. This kid is making more money in a day than I'm making in a month. Something's got to change. So then I worked in the movie business doing this, that, or the other, mostly just to pay the rent, hang out. Started to get small grants. American Film Institute had a grant. I think I got 20 grand. National Endowment for the Arts, 25 grand. I got a little bit of money here and there. And we're talking, is that 50 years ago? We're talking 50 years ago. So coin went a different way back then. 25 grand you could do a lot with. And then I got into graduate school at UCLA.
When was, you'd say, your first taste of success?
It's interesting how we define success, but certainly the first real success would be my film In Search of Our Fathers. And I'll give you a few indicators of what made it successful. First of all, it took me 10 years to make. That's not necessarily being successful at all. That is being determined, not giving up. In Search for Our Fathers is a film about my journey to learn about and to meet my father for the first time. And through that lens, to look at the African-American family and community. And back in the 80s, 90s, 60s, there was this notion that there was a pathology in the African-American community of single women raising children without fathers in the home. And as I looked at my own extended family, that was true. There were 4 generations of women who raised children without fathers, husbands. So In Search of Our Fathers became my first success. It was at the Sundance Film Festival. At that festival, Quentin Tarantino was there with Reservoir Dogs, Allison Anders with Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control, Tony Danza with Zebrahead. But they were all talking about In Search of Our Fathers. Now, why were they talking about In Search of Our Fathers? Because my mother, who's the primary character or person in Search of Our Fathers, came to the festival, and they all watched the film, and then they would see my mother walking up and down Main Street in Park City, and it was really, it was a buzz. And then it went on to be broadcast on American television. It screened all over the world. I went to festivals everywhere in the world, even though it's about a black family. In American, it screened in France, Germany, Austria, Japan, Brazil. So screening countries where they don't speak English necessarily. What made it work? Because it's about what is universal. We all have families. We're all grappling with fathers. But I flew in from a festival in Brazil, in Rio, back to Los Angeles where I was living on the night that it was being broadcast on Frontline. And when I went through customs, somebody said, "You're in the newspaper." And there was a review of In Search for Our Fathers. That, I guess, is success if you're in the newspaper. So I was in the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, et cetera, et cetera. So that was my first success, I guess, as a filmmaker.
What was the moment you decided to make that film? What was it like?
I was very much influenced by the professors at Harvard and the curriculum at Harvard. And I had professors who were making films about family themselves, and many of the students then gravitated towards making a similar kind of film. That's what we were watching. I had a moment, and I can't remember precisely, but I did have a moment where I recognized and remembered that I did not ever know my father. And it wasn't a big deal as a kid because a lot of the guys in the neighborhood didn't have fathers. So no stigma. And I had this thought, I thought to myself, wow, it would make a fantastic photograph of two men, a father and son, meeting for the first time. And then I thought further and thought, it's not just one moment, it's a series of moments. And so I asked my mother to tell me about my father. And she said very little, but she gave me a telephone number. And I decided that I would make a film. At that moment, was going to just be about this phone call. And so In Search for Our Fathers begins with a first phone call between me and my father, who chastised me for when he learned that I had been filming the phone call without asking his permission, a big taboo in documentary filmmaking and documentary ethics. But that was the beginning. And it took 10 years, took 7 years before I finally met him. And it took another 3 years after I finished filming before I finished editing.
how did you eventually get to meet him? Because 7 years is quite a duration.
Right. So I made a decision that it wasn't only now about meeting him, but it was trying to understand why he wasn't in the home, and then more widely, what was the circumstance or the situation with my extended family, right? You are influenced and informed by those around you. And at that time, my mother was living in Paris, France. And I think I took 2 or 3 trips to Paris to get my mother to explain to me what was the situation with my father. So that was part of the filmmaking. And then my extended family lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I filmed them. So there was these efforts to open it up and not just be going after my father. I had one opportunity in the early phases, maybe 3 years in. I was doing a speaking engagement for one of my films, From Harlem to Harvard, in Ohio, not far from where my father lived. And another scene in the film, I took a series of pictures of myself calling him, and he never answered the phone. So I kept going, and then finally, I made a decision, so this is about 7 years in, 6 years in, that it was time to just find the man. And I took a bus from New York City to Ohio and called him. And this time he answered. And this time he said, I'll pick you up. And then I filmed us talking to each other. And in many ways, though it was climactic, it wasn't the end of the film. So real life has certain kinds of progressions, but films have their own narratives and story arcs. And it became clear as I was editing that there was one scene still left to film, and that was with my mother, who was really the kind of catalyst in all of this. And I had a rough cut of the film, and I invited my mother to Los Angeles to visit me. And I, at a certain point, screened the film for her, and we have a final kind of conversation. She had not seen my father since she was 18 years old. And that becomes the end of the film, where we actually find connection in feeling okay that this man had not been part of our lives. Strange, right? So the pursuit to find one's father ends with the son being okay that the father was not part of his life.
What was your mother's reaction to the film initially and then eventually?
Yeah, this brings me back to Sundance, because all through making the film, my mother was very resistant, particularly when I was in Paris with her, and partly because I was still a beginning filmmaker, and I didn't know what I knew 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later. I spent a lot of my time in Paris asking the same question of my mother. Tell me about my father. Tell me about my father. Tell me about my father. And variations. I just wanted to know about my father. Like, that was the driving force. And for the most part, my mother talked about my grandmother, who died when I was 3, who I didn't know, no memory of. And I almost never filmed anything when my mother talked about her mother. But it wasn't until I was in the editing room or starting to be an educator that I learned something from In Search of Our Fathers that I now use in teaching. And that is that particularly when you do documentaries, people can only give you what they can give. And the second part is that discretion is in the answer, not the question. So you can ask the most indiscreet question, and people can answer it however they want. But when you ask your questions, even if they're not answering it directly or the way you want them to answer it, this is what I would be telling students, and I do tell students, be comfortable with whatever they tell you, because what they are telling you is what they can give you, and what they give you is what can be transformative, because they are being vulnerable. They are taking off their clothes, they're giving something. So this is why I laugh. The reason I laugh is that when I got into Sundance, I was stunned when she said, "I'm coming." I was like, and I call her Winnie, her name is Winnie. I said, "Winnie, you resisted this film. You didn't, every time I asked you a question, you were," now Sundance is the preeminent film festival in the United States. She had heard about it, she was coming. Also, her son got into Sundance, she was coming. And then when people saw her in the film and how dignified I think she is, and then they saw her on the street, she was like a movie star. So she went from resistance to embracing it, and I am always surprised when she says to me, "I want to show somebody In Search of Our Fathers," because of how hard it was to make that film. Anyway, so that's kind of that story.
I kind of want to know on an operational basis. So how did you, for 10 years, I don't think you carried around a crew with you. So how did you film all that?
Right. So In Search of Our Fathers, 90% of it is me doing all the filming. And this was all on 16 millimeter film, except for the last scene with my father. So I had, in Paris, there's a camera called the Aton. So I had this sound recorder created, wrapped over my shoulder, Aton on my shoulder, shotgun on the camera. And again, I was a beginning filmmaker. I didn't know one thing that I also tell students. Now it's not so important because of 4K and 6K and 8K, but I never changed the focal length when I ask questions. So when I tell students now, if you're doing an interview and you have one camera, every time you ask a question, change the focal length, because you can then cut between without being a jump cut. So when I got into the editing room, I didn't change focal lengths. Like I said, I was not the best film student. I was just the most dogged and determined film student. I didn't learn my cinematography lessons well, if you will. So I had to be creative in the editing room. And I would cut to black in between things, and it had a very powerful impact. Black became punctuation. It became jarring, but pretty much you see me filming and me going, take one, snapping, and some of that's in it. So back to what I've said, I was dogged. I had small money, and I just was determined to make the movie. I get in trouble for this, and it's perhaps not so applicable anymore, but I have a belief. I say to students, and I've been teaching filmmaking now since 1994, so that's 30 years. I say to students who are getting close to graduating, what do you want to be? You want to be a filmmaker or a film worker? That comes from my personal experience. At a certain point, I didn't work on people's films. I made films. I was a filmmaker by hook or crook. So that's also kind of evolved in me because I didn't have the money, couldn't hire you, couldn't hire a camera person, had to make the movie. And also I was a filmmaker. I'm making a movie.
I recall that the biggest investment you made in making your film was firing yourself, right?
That's right. I started editing in Search for Our Fathers, and the first cut was 6 hours, and it was great. I fell asleep a lot, but it was great. And then I realized that the director had to fire the editor, and I was the editor. The best move that I made, because the editor who came in, Lisa Lehman, helped me to make the film. I mean, now I edit sort of my own films a little bit, but if you're making a film that you've done all the filming, you've done all the writing, it's about your family, it's hard to be discriminating as to what really works. Like, everything was important, hence 6 hours. And while everything was important, back to what I was saying, that was real life. Or as I also reference to students about editing their work, I reference Walter Murch's book, In the Blink of an Eye, who reminds us that the only thing that's important is what's within the frame, not all the stuff that went on outside of the frame. And there were too many moments in my 6 hour cut that were because of all the things that went into, I had to drag this suitcase, I had to do this, I had to do that. That was really, really good. It was really, really boring. So yes, I fired the editor, and it eventually got made, got into Sundance, was on TV, was my passport to the world.
And out of the one-person limitation that, that was this kind of situation with your film, what were the strengths of that? And what lessons do you carry from those days and those 7 years to today?
I've probably made about 10 to 15 documentaries of my own. I would offer that 2 of them, I did the bulk of the filming myself, besides In Search of Our Fathers. The undocumented, about immigration on the U.S.-Mexico border. I'm filming in the morgue. I'm filming in the desert with the Border Patrol agents. I'm chasing after them as they're trying to chase down migrants. I couldn't have made that film with a crew. My film, Murders That Matter, which follows a African-American Muslim mother who decides to run for public office in Philadelphia in the aftermath of the murder of her youngest son. I filmed that over 3-4 years. I could not have filmed that with a crew because I couldn't have afforded a crew. But also the intimacy that I had in both of those films is something that comes out of doing something as a one-person crew. But because I'm not a camera person, because I'm not a sound person, there are also compromises in my work. Some things are not exposed as well. Maybe a little out of focus here or there because I am wearing all of these hats. But they are the most intimate moments in the undocumented when Marcos is a man who's been looking for his father, who crossed the U.S.-Mexico border, and 7 years after searching for him, he comes to a kind of acceptance that his father has died in the desert. I'm sitting directly across from him in his kitchen, and he is crying a snot cry. He realizes his dad is not coming back. You can't do that with a 4-camera, 3-camera setup. So what did I do? I lived in New York City. I had a backpack that had my camera and all the lenses. I had my tripod. I had a small suitcase with clothes and accessories. I would get on the New York City subway, 5:30 in the morning, go to the train station, get off at the train station, get out of the train station, take the trolley to Movita's office, set everything up, worked my tail off all day long, and then I paid the camera person, the sound person, and the director, and the producer, and the PA, me, by having a very good dinner every night. So that's how you make a movie if you have no money. You want to make the movie if you're dogged and determined. If you want to be a filmmaker and not a film worker, you make the movie.
So what was the fuel that got you to even post Sundance? Actually, I'm just curious. The fuel, like, you know, I'm pretty sure you hit many moments where you say, "Why am I even doing this?" Right? Or maybe.
No, on the contrary. After Sundance, I thought I was going to be a Hollywood director. I went to meetings, various studios. I was a beginner still, and I thought by going to these meetings, they were going to give me a film. And I was very frustrated. And my agent finally had to sit me down and say, those are meet and greets. This is like getting you into the business, and they want to know what you want to do next. And I didn't realize that I thought, I'm a great success. They're going to roll out the carpet for me. But no, you have to earn it and prove it. I had they criticized me for going to festivals around the world. Why are you going to these festivals? It's like, why am I going to these festivals? All the people I've met, the experiences I had. And it led to eventually a script being given to me by a very powerful producer. And I did a very strong pitch to it, and I was going to direct that feature. But because I was a first-time director, the studio, Disney affiliate, wanted me to do a director's test. So I did a director's test. I directed a scene, pretty good direction of it. But in the end, the studio passed on the project, and they wouldn't put it into turnaround. Turnaround is where you turn it around and give it back to the producer. So I spent a year sort of not sure what to do with myself. I'm in LA, not sure what to do with myself in the movie business. And I got a phone call from a professor, former professor of mine who had become a dean of a film school in North Carolina. And he said, I had just seen In Search of Our Fathers on TV, and would you like to come to North Carolina to teach? And I wasn't sure. I went to North Carolina, came back, wasn't sure, but it was far more appealing than working at Starbucks or Barnes & Noble's. So I left LA and started teaching at the North Carolina School of the Arts, School of Filmmaking in 1994. And that really took me away from Hollywood, but didn't ultimately take me away from documentary filmmaking. But I left Hollywood at that point. So I took my knowledge of fiction filmmaking, went to a film school, taught directing, and second or third year in, I got a call asking if I wanted to direct an hour of a 4-hour documentary series. So I went to San Francisco, Berkeley, and spent a year and made a documentary. And then after that, other things started to come. And in that way, Hollywood was in my rear view mirror in the sense that I didn't have to chase for an opportunity for a Hollywood feature. I was being given opportunities to make documentaries. And not that they came easy, but make documentaries. And after that, my probably most notoriety documentary is called Towns of Jasper. In 1996, a black man was dragged behind a pickup truck in Jasper, Texas, by 3 white men who were members of the Aryan Nation. And a friend of mine who was white, he and I made a documentary about the murders, but we did it in a very singular way, at least at that time. Whitney, who's white, filmed only the white community, and I filmed only the black community. And this film, fascinating is that as we described it to people and pitched it to people, they would be so taken back by the idea of filming with segregated crews. This is a liberal America. They don't want segregation, but they found themselves still talking about the project for hours after, and we started to get money. I think we made that film for about $1 million. We got grants. And that film ended up with me and Whitney being on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Full hour, talking about our film. Other major press publicity. And really at that point forward, I was a documentary filmmaker of some success or importance, or at least attractiveness. And I made several documentaries in a row after that and never looked back really towards Hollywood, maybe once.
I want to touch on two things that you dug into. Firstly, it's teaching. So when a student brings to you a film, what would be the first recommendation you give them?
All right, I'll talk both about fiction filmmaking and nonfiction because I do both. I teach both, that is. For a fiction film, I'm always looking at the script first. I want to know, I have to kind of be brought into it. And so I've taught screenwriting and think a lot about story structure, what's the character's need, wants, and those are the things that I'll talk about first. If they're ready to make the film, then I talk about principles of directing. How do you want to cover it? How do you want to tell the story? I try to take students away from the drive of I'm going to get 18 shots in a day, like this sort of like, as though that's heroic. And it's like, no, what are the exact shots you need? What are your intentions? What is the clarity of that? I talk to them about who are their collaborators. How are you collaborating? Is it somebody just working, you telling them what to do, or are you collaborating? What do they have to offer? For a documentary film, which ultimately is both easier and harder for a student. Easier because you can be 18, 19, 20, 21 years old and make a film about a 50-year-old, a 40-year-old, about somebody who you don't have any connection to. But most scripts of 19, 20, 21, 22 years old are their worldview, which is not a big worldview, so there are kind of limitations. So easier in terms of kind of aspiration to do a nonfiction film, but harder because real life is not scripted. People don't, take my mother, for example. They don't answer the questions that you want to ask them. It's hard to help students see that an interview is not a documentary, but it's part of a documentary. What are we going to see? Is there a story? One of the expressions that I have, I call them Markoisms, is that with nonfiction films, we are almost always drawn to something, but it's already happened. That's the backstory. It already happened. So I always say to the students, myself, those that I executive produce for, what's the go-forward story? What are we going to see from this point going forward? Interview, people doing things. So that's what I try to walk them through. And in both cases, I try to encourage and therefore discourage. I try to encourage the opportunities that are found in limitations. In a fiction film, 2 characters, 3 characters, 1 location. in a nonfiction film, one person pursuing something. Don't try to make a film about world peace. Make a film about somebody who's starting a little organization that's going to try to raise money for a peace effort. So I always sort of try to collapse it down to there's value in limitation. It's not a hindrance, it's actually an opportunity.
We would love to hear about your teaching methods, generally and locally as well.
I came to Doha, to Northwestern, I believe in 2017, maybe 2016, to start teaching. And I began with a screenwriting class and a directing class. And I would offer that, at least as a beginning teacher, even though I taught for 18, 19 years at NYU, I bring one thing to start, and that is passion. I don't know if you've taught, but teaching is managing and commanding the attention of X number of people in front of you. And at any given moment, half of them or a third of them are thinking about dinner, a third are trying to either stay awake or pay attention, and a third are raptly paying attention to you. And in the next minute, that can change. All right, so this is my philosophy for teaching. So I got to be passionate. I got to be performative. But my teaching journey here in Qatar has evolved. It was one thing in 2017. It's very different here in 25, 26. When I first started teaching here, it was a smaller school, less classes, less filmmaking classes, and a more clear concentration of students who were really, really interested in filmmaking. I teach filmmaking, not film working. I teach filmmaking. Now, there are more classes, more students, and more students who are not interested truly in filmmaking. So it's harder. Those are sort of the general contours. I've taught one class since I first came here, so I probably have taught it 6 times, and that's called Directing the Camera. It's a class where students learn about directing by ultimately directing 2-page, 3-page scenes over the course of the semester. When I first started teaching here, I had a lot of real estate to teach it, 6 hours a week. Students could light a set, work with actors, really roll up their sleeves, really practice and apply the lessons that I was imparting in the classroom. Now, we have 75 minutes, not much time to do much of anything, but to do something. I have a series of exercises that I use in that class. And so teaching is really over the course of 15 weeks or 10 weeks in Evanston is really kind of taking someone or a group of someone's on a journey. And it is my hope as an educator that I leave them with ideas, giving you tools, giving you insight so that you can be a citizen of the world. I want the students that I teach to go out there and make a difference at whatever they do. And filmmaking is a form of communication. You learn about communicating in my classes, whether it's documentary or fiction. You ultimately learn about communicating. You learn about translating your ideas into something, and then that can apply to whatever you do in the world.
I'm curious on, going from all the way from New York to Qatar. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of differences, and as well as commonalities. How do you approach teaching students that maybe view things differently? Is that something that you kind of feel battled with or challenging?
There certainly are cultural differences, cultural mores that are different between the United States and Qatar. And yet, 18 to 21-year-olds share a lot that crosses borders, social media, media consumption, shared values there. But cultural values and cultural mores are certainly something that I encounter here in a different way than in the United States. Let me share some of the things that have made teaching here really exciting for me. I care a great deal about difference and diversity and the polyglot of humanity. And in the United States, I am lucky if I have a class that has 3 or 4 international students. I come here and I am teaching students from Qatar, Palestine, Syria, Sudan, Egypt, Morocco, Pakistan, India, Japan, China, Poland, now Kazakhstan. I'll let you in on a secret about teaching. It is the best opportunity to be a student, being a teacher. I learned so much, not about filmmaking necessarily, although I learned that, but I learned so much about the world because I am curious and I will ask questions. And sometimes those questions perhaps cross a cultural line, not because I want to, but because I'm curious. And then I hope that, again, a Markoism, don't censor yourself, let other people censor you. So sometimes we don't know if something is not respectful, even though we should, but we don't always. And that's when there's an opportunity to be informed and educated. So yes, coming here has been, completely different on the one hand, and completely the same. They don't like to do homework. They don't like to read. That's not generic to the United States or Qatar. I'm being very honest, it's like, and I say they, right? Not every student is that way. So there are a lot of things that are just universal. But, I've taken great joy in watching, observing, and occasionally offering insight and watching 7, 8, 9 Qatari women direct, do sound, camera, do all of the make the scene. It's, on the one hand, but of course they can, of course they would, but it's so fabulous. And I will even talk about my last class that I taught last semester, and watching this group of students move from doubt, insecurity, complaints about me and my methods to doing a chase scene. When I said to her, now we're going to do the chase scene, they were like, how will we do that, Professor? There's no direction in the script, Professor. Because they suddenly came to the understanding that they had been learning a little bit from me, a lot from each other, and then they went out and did it.
If someone is interested in making films, making movies, what would be one thing, if you had to pick one thing that you need to know, and you cannot move forward without it?
Sacrifice. Now, The one thing you need to know if you want to go into the movie business or if you want to be a filmmaker is sacrifice. Now, you're looking at me and saying, what is that? That's not focus, director's chair, how do you hold a boom pole, how do you line a script? Because if you're going to succeed, whatever that is, if you're going to find fulfillment, that's success. If you're going to find fulfillment in, I call it the movie business, just writ large, you have to be prepared to be dogged. It's not going to be given to you. Even if you're the most talented person, even if your mom or dad or uncle can get you a job, you still have to prove yourself. And that journey of proving has sacrifice. You may have to sacrifice going out with your friends, spending time with your family on a particular night, working for less money than you could if you worked in a more conventional business. I was going to wear a sweatshirt from my first film class that I taught in North Carolina. And I was teaching a group of students, almost all of them from North Carolina, so a state school, rural kids, some from the bigger cities, which are not very big cities in North Carolina. And I was trying to help them to see that filmmaking is a long-distance race. So I named the class, we called ourselves Marathon Filmmaking. And what I explained to them is that filmmaking is like running a marathon. Now, the marathon, the elite runners, 2 hours, 14 minutes, 2 hours, 8 minutes, hundreds of thousands of dollars to win. But when you see a marathon, there are 100 elite runners and there are 10,000 runners. Every single one of those runners, if they cross that finish line, whether it's in 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, they won. They feel like they succeeded. And so marathon filmmaking or filmmaking is like running a marathon. It doesn't matter when you get there. You just got to cross that finish line. Just got to be willing to be dogged and determined. And so that's why I always talk about filmmaking and film workers, not so much that you can't work and make your way to being a filmmaker, but I'm just trying to help students as they prepare to leave a university setting to think about the journey that they want to take. What's their plan? 1-year plan, 3-year plan, 5-year plan. And it can change every day, but you got to have a plan. So sacrifice is what I would say, and probably do say, to students when they're embarking on the next phase of their life's journey.
That was a very insightful talk.
Thank you.
From the insightful to the practical to the ambitious. It was a pleasure having you.
I appreciate being invited to share some of my experiences, and I'm grateful to you all, and
thank you.
Do good things.